Hi, this is Adam Schmitt, author of Speechless, and this is Author's Voice.
Welcome to Author's Voice, connecting authors to the world. This is LadyBird and Friends, and I am your host, Betsy Bird. Today we are talking about Speechless. Now, this is published by Candlewick Press. It is for $16.99, and today our guest is the author of this book, Mr. Adam Schmitt. Hello.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming, man. This is really cool. Now, if you guys are watching this on Facebook Live, or on our website, please use the comments to suggest a question of some sort. Include your name and where you're from so that we can properly credit you for your brilliant question that you'll be asking. And most importantly, if you would like to order a signed book right now, it is the holiday season, it is a gift-giving season, and who wouldn't want a really good signed book? You can do so. You can go to authorsvoice.net and you can get your signed copy sent to you. How cool would that be? It would be super cool. So anyway, thanks so much for coming, man. This is really, really fun.
Happy to.
So 2018, I believe, we're at the end of 2018 right now, was a really good year for children's books with funerals. We saw a real uptick in them, and they were awesome. There was Matt James's The Funeral, looks like The Funeral. And then, of course, we've got your book as well. So why don't you just give a synopsis? What is this book about?
Sure. It takes place in a short period of time, and at the very beginning, it is our main character, Jimmy, walking into his first wake ever, and he's already feeling uncomfortable about it, and it's sadly for his cousin of the same age, and at the very beginning, when they walk in, his parents say, "We need you to do something. We need you to talk tomorrow about your cousin." And he tells them, "I don't want to do it. Public speaking. We need you to do this." He says, "No, and we all don't want to be here. We have to." He says, "I don't want to do it because I hated my cousin and so did everybody else. So what am I supposed to say?" And the rest of the book is him navigating the wake and the family dynamics and how people operate in that environment. And he finds that he almost can't be sad because he's so anxious about what to say. And as people come in, they trigger memories of his cousin. And as the story progresses, he kind of pieces together things about his cousin that maybe he didn't see or hear before. And it ends with him going to the podium and deciding what he's going to say.
Yeah, the cover image is a little bit of a spoiler because it shows that he actually must give the speech since he's standing at the podium.
He does.
In the silhouette there. Where did the idea for this book come from? Did you go to a ton of funerals when you were a kid?
No, and I've had a lot of people ask, did you have to give a eulogy? One, is this you? I get that. No.
Oh.
Or do you have a cousin like this? Or did you have to give a eulogy? And I haven't. I would say about 5 years ago, I did have a stretch where I did go to services. And we have those in life where things come in waves, and they were all wildly unique. And I remember going to one for someone who was like a second grandma to me, and it was how I thought of a wake, where we celebrated someone's life and we were sad. And it was such a package of this is how it should be. And I went to others that weren't that way. I unfortunately attended services of former students who passed away. I went to a service with somebody who took their own life. And the range of emotions that I saw, and realizing as an adult, I'm not sure how to navigate all of this. And when I went to a service of, I had some students and siblings, their mom passed away. And when I went to her service and just saw all of my 8th graders there and thought, how would they have any idea how to navigate something like this or know how to act? And it made me think of beyond the grief. There's a lot that comes with a wake. And I thought, what if kids had, I don't want to say a guide, but just a companion to know you're not alone, not knowing, do I shake hands or hug? Or can I laugh? Yeah. You're not alone not knowing how to act in this situation.
Yeah, not knowing what to say
Yeah.
when you have that random person who just comes up to you and
Yeah.
just starts talking for some reason,
Yeah.
and you do not want to be there.
And that's a lot of people's, I think, natural response to nerves or uncomfortableness is, I'm just going to keep talking. Or maybe I'll ask an awkward question because silence is worse.
Right. Well, and I like the range, because you include in here like the range of how people react at funerals. You've got the person who just like, demands stuff. You've got the person who's the hugger who wants to make everyone cry, and let it out. You've got the people who are like all stiff and bottled up inside, and it's a nice way of looking at it. So is this funeral then sort of an amalgamation of funerals you've been to, or was there one in particular that came to mind when you made it?
It is. Over that stretch, there were things I couldn't forget about in each one of them. There was one service where it was a former student, and there was a moment in that service I remember, and I just remember when the parents spoke about their daughter and when they left the podium. I'll just never forget that, and that was the seed that really started a big part of it, and then going to so many others, and that's what I couldn't forget was, like I said, the one where I went to and I was sad, and I expected to be sad, and we celebrated life, and I expected that, but when I went to other services, and there would be anger, and there would be shame, and there would be confusion, and remembering how confused I was, I just couldn't let go of it.
So I haven't read a lot of funeral books for middle graders.
Yeah.
What were you using as a guide for this? You sort of alluded to the fact that the book does have a lot of like flashbacks, the TV show Lost, perhaps. What was there like a particular kids book that you were using as a guide as you wrote it, or was there some book for adults, for example, that was serving as a guide? Like, was there something you were following, or was this just coming as it was coming on the page?
It definitely did not write A to Z as a complete story, and I wrote the book as a collection of short stories.
Oh, really?
And
that's interesting.
once I had that completed, then I threaded together, knowing the characters were similar, but each of the flashbacks, I went into writing it thinking, can this stand alone as a scene? And each of the funeral scenes, could this stand alone? And that helped me navigate which scenes I should put some energy into. And then when it was complete, I kind of did some shell game with the funeral scenes and knowing how I could show Jimmy's range of emotion and anxiety building throughout and which characters would bring that out. But when I thought of the wake, because you're right, there aren't a lot of middle grade books about a wake.
Not a ton. Not a ton.
My inspiration was the Department of Motor Vehicles because
explain more.
I just think there's no better people watching, and the DMV is a place that everyone's got to go.
Yeah.
No matter who you are, everybody has to go to the DMV, and I thought of wakes very similar. That at some point everyone has to go, and it is an environment that brings out, unfortunately, a lot of some of our worst traits when we're in that kind of cornered emotion. And I thought that would be a kind of a perfect storm for a middle grade protagonist to, one, be in an uncomfortable situation, two, know that that uncomfortable situation is going to be very public the next day with everybody watching, and everywhere he turns is, I can't believe this guy's saying this. And
am I the only one hearing this?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But, and it makes more sense to have him go to a funeral than the DMV. So there you go.
Yeah.
That would be a very boring book.
Yeah.
And make no sense. You're a child. One thing that you talked about, so you wrote them these flashbacks as short stories, and they do entirely stand on their own. But then you had to sort of organize them in a way because the flow of the book is you're totally Team Jimmy at the beginning.
Yeah.
Team Jimmy is like, Patrick's a jerk.
Yep.
Here is the litany of my complaints about Patrick. Story number 1, my example. Story number 2, my example. So it starts out with Patrick just being horrible, and you're just seeing him being horrible.
Yeah.
And then it does this slow change, as it does, to showing why Patrick is horrible, and why Patrick is much more of a victim in some ways than Jimmy. I think one of the reviews of this book sort of talked about how it is a book about untreated mental health issues.
Correct.
Was that the goal from the start, or like was that the whole thing you were aiming for? Yeah.
It was, and I wanted this to be completely from Jimmy's perspective, so there's not a lot of labels, because he's not fully aware of a lot of labels, and a big theme in my book is the family dynamic, that we don't talk about it, that we just don't. So he wouldn't have heard it, because it wouldn't be something we talk about. And I wanted, in the flashbacks, it is the arc of Patrick, and I really wanted Patrick to be painted in a way where you would walk away and think he was really put in those situations. And that is, at first, Jimmy sees him as a jerk. He ruined this, he ruined that, he broke this, and starts to realize maybe he shouldn't have been in that camp with me. Maybe, a kid like that, that's not the best environment, where he's constantly forced to work with other kids and perform and complete a task in this incredibly structured environment. And the parents, while best intended, thought this will really help him. And they kept putting him in these situations that were not healthy for a child with his needs.
Right. Oh, the parents. Of the adults in general. There might be one adult character in this book I did not want to just reach through the pages and just physically strangle. And it was interesting reading this book, trying to get the perspective of how a kid would be reading it. Because when you're a kid, you have to deal with horrible adults. At some point, you're going to encounter a horrible adult. They're the adult, and there's nothing. If you see injustice, too bad, kid. You're a kid. They're an adult. And they're the ones in charge. And you begin life as a kid sort of thinking adults are always right, and then you get to the horrible realization that often they have no freaking idea what they're doing, which I really enjoyed about this book and found so horribly frustrating about it. Because you can see why the parents are making the choices they are.
Yes.
And they're horrible choices.
Yes.
And it all kind of culminates obviously in Patrick, but in a large part it's Patrick's younger sister, who, because of, I'm sure the parents would say because of Patrick, and I would disagree entirely, has lost most of her hearing. And it comes out slowly in the book that her parents are just assuming that some magical hearing aid is going to appear, and she will be able to hear perfectly, and so they don't have to do any of the work of trying to communicate with her. Was she in the book from the start, or did she come in later?
She was in from the start.
Okay.
Yeah, she had a different injury in the early drafts, but it very quietly is her story. And I was very inspired, a book that inspired that. I still remember reading One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and how much I loved Chief being the narrator and never speaking. And I've always been attracted, I love silent characters. I'm fascinated with silent characters. And I wanted a character who would be completely overshadowed by Patrick's personality, and would also be collateral damage at some point to some of it, but still have that heart and be the sister, be there for him, and know my brother loves me.
Yeah, she humanizes him to a very great extent. And I'm not going to give away the ending, but there's this killer ending that you do that's really, really good between her and Patrick, and it's really lovely. And yeah, it's, and I think that, you mentioned collateral damage, and to a certain extent. I mean, you could say the same for Jimmy. And the tricky thing is, of course, when you have Jimmy, in some ways, is the most difficult character in this book, I would say, to write, because he's the narrator, which he's a decent guy. Decent guys are horrible to write because nobody wants to be friends with the decent guy. They're much more interested in the crazy guy over here who could do anything oh, he's got some fireworks,
Yeah.
And the decent guy, so there is this, you put in, and I love this continual thing where his pants are too tight.
Yeah.
Consistently too tight. The whole way through. As someone who has had pants that are too tight, I felt that pain, I understood that pain, and I really, really loved it. And another thing that I loved was that you kind of set the book up at the beginning. All the child reader wants to know is how Patrick died.
Right.
And you do not give that away until right at the end. And by the time you've gotten to Patrick's death, or at least the explanation of how he died, the reader doesn't care anymore because now they're so invested in the story. But at the beginning, it's very much almost a mystery and all sorts of speculation. I know as I was telling this book to my 7-year-old, she was like, how did he die? I'd be like, I don't know yet. It's not going to tell me till the end. And she couldn't figure out why the book would do that. But I assume that's why you did that.
Yeah, and I wanted it to be not a aha mystery reveal, but I really wanted to focus on the impact, and the way for me to do it was to not talk about it. And that's also something I've experienced at services, is it's maybe a whisper in the corner of how did they die? And it's again that confusion or that shame or whatever emotion it may be for different people, but that's something I've experienced, and it's something that I wanted nobody to talk about. None of the guests. It wasn't going to be talked about.
Yeah. Well, and that's very consistent with how they live their lives. Like, that's an unpleasant thing. We're just not going to talk about that. We're just going to slip that under the rug over there. That's okay. Yeah, I was a big surprise of my adult life when I went to my first wake and I discovered that you can go through an entire funeral service and have no idea how the person died.
Yeah.
They don't put it in the program. It's not like something that they suddenly announce, and they died this way.
Yeah.
So you might never know. It's a big shocker. The eulogy that finally comes at the end, did you know what that was going to be when you started the book?
I didn't.
You did not?
I did not know. And I'm so grateful it evolved into what it did. I knew he was going to speak. I did not know what that was going to look like. And I can say the early drafts I wrote, the first scenes I wrote were flashbacks. And then I started piecing together. And at first, the wake was just the glue for the flashbacks. But then they took on a life of their own. I did not know what he was going to say.
At what point did you know? When you were writing it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I needed to figure out that character more. And yeah, Jimmy, he told me what he was going to say, and it didn't come out the way it did here. That eulogy scene, I probably went over more than anything in the book I just needed every word to be perfect. And because he was saying just one word, 2 words, 1 sentence. And I needed each one to resonate. So I went over that many, many times.
So you were not an outliner then? You don't meticulously say every single thing that's going to happen and then just type it out?
Not for that. I am definitely a plotter.
You're a plotter?
100% a plotter.
Okay.
But my plotting are my big points. I'm not a pantser, for sure. But in scenes like that, I know who's there, I know who's in the room, I know who's going to talk. I might not know what they're going to say.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So in your outline, it would simply say, this is where the eulogy goes, and that's it. Okay. That sounds nerve-wracking. That sounds a lot of stress there. Oh, my goodness me. Have you ever had to write a eulogy?
No, I haven't had to write a eulogy. I drew from a couple times I've had to speak where I officiated my sister's wedding years ago, and I just remember how incredibly nervous I was, and everybody said, "Well, that's so nice you're doing it," and you'll just say everyone said, "Oh, I just say a few nice things," but I internalized that as this is my sister's wedding and the most important day of her life, and I can't screw it up. And I just remember I had to write it because because it wasn't a religious ceremony. I couldn't just grab the Bible and take a religious Catholic ceremony. I had to write a ceremony from top to bottom, so I had to structure it, and I just remember how nervous I was for it. And the other time was a friend of mine retired, and it's pretty common in a lot of schools when someone retires, you do like a funny skit and make fun of them. And he said, yeah, I don't want that. If you just want to say a few words about me, that's all I want.
Oh.
And I know he meant it. Truly, don't do any work. I just say a few. But I took that on as I'm ushering this person into the next chapter of their life, and I spent so long writing that retirement speech. And that's what I drew from, the anxiety that I felt going into that this is such an important moment, everyone is going to be listening, and I have to do this right for this person.
I hope your pants weren't too tight.
They weren't.
Good.
I was good with that.
Sweatpants all the way. Fantastic. Now, as I read this, I could definitely see it as a play. It's a very limited, I mean, you're at the wake, you've got the flashbacks, and those could be other things, but mostly you're in one location, then you're at the funeral, and that's the other location. Have you done any playwriting at all?
No, and that's the first time I've heard
really?
this would make a good play.
It just seemed natural to me. I was like, yeah, no, this would make a perfect play. I love it. It would be a good kids play, actually. And it'd be a timely kids play, that as well. Do you see it as a standalone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have asked me that.
Yeah.
I think the only character I would consider exploring is Sophia. She would be the only one.
I was left with a lot of Sophia questions at the end, because at one point, her friends who are in her classes to learn sign language, is that where they're from?
It's my favorite scene.
Yeah. Yeah, they come in, and there's that horrible, for them, that horrible slow dawning realization that her parents cannot understand them when they're doing some pretty basic, sorry for your loss stuff. And just the rising, I mean, Sophia is very much the heart of the novel. Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. I have heard the theory that when you have three characters in a book, one is the head, one is the heart, and one is the gut. And clearly Jimmy is the head, and that Patrick is the gut, and that Sophia is clearly the heart.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
So, yeah, that's my little theory about your own book. There you go. That's fun stuff. So, were there, and this is sort of a personal question, so feel free not to ask it, but were there, because we're talking about these parents who sort of sweep under the rug anything that they find even mildly upsetting in some way, or they're not afraid of confrontation, but they don't seem to like to deal with issues. Have you known people in your own life who were like that?
Oh, sure.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people that's their normal.
Yes.
And that's what I wanted to depict, that Jimmy wouldn't know any different because this is their normal. And that's one thing as a teacher I've always told my kids, that you know whose family is normal, and all right, no hands are going up. And every family has its own quirks, and I thought this would be an environment that would bring that out, and that was one running theme in it, that it is, I think sometimes things are passed down to generations, and one of those things could be our family culture of we're fine, and there are no problems, and the other one is a diagnosis of mental illness is frequently passed down, and you can look at parents, and it's typically one of them that has passed it down, and it's when those two are combined, it's a bad recipe. But of something we can't talk about that we should talk about. Yeah.
Well, I mean, especially since right now you've got all these mental health issues that are coming out that people are talking about how they're not being dealt with, and then you have these parents in this book who, and it's interesting. I do wonder, like, have you talked to kids about this book at all? Who have read it?
A little bit, yeah. And being
it just
new,
came out, so,
there's only a few kids I've talked to about it. So I've not had really longer conversations with them. I guess one of the things I'm really curious about is if kids, there'd be certain kids who would sit back and think, am I Patrick?
There would be kids, and I also wonder, this is very different from when I was a kid. When I was a kid, mental health issues, not even something that was on the board. kids today are hearing about it more,
Yeah.
but it's not exactly ubiquitous. It's not like I'm turning on my
Right.
Steven Universe and like, oh, there's one about mental health issues. You know,
Mhm.
but it does come up. So I'm very curious if kids, as they're reading this book, when do they make that crossover from Patrick is a jerk to Patrick may have mental issues? Because even for an adult reading the book, you're kind of like, you're in it, and you're like, Patrick's a jerk, Patrick's a jerk. Oh, wait, what's going on here?
Mhm.
Okay, wait a minute, okay.
Yeah.
I think something's going on here. And this kid is not getting the help that he needs. And he doesn't have the resources to,
No.
because the parents, the adults around him are failing him.
And one of the things I wanted to depict in my years of teaching, I've seen a lot of kids need help, and I wanted to really show that so often with mental health, it is not, here it is, there's the diagnosis exactly in the box, and
Here's the pill.
Yep, that's it.
Now you're cured.
There's typically a few things going on, and when you hear about depression and you're not mentioning anxiety, those go hand in hand, and oftentimes there's another element that's thrown in there too, and it does take some effort to have self-care and to have people care for you, and that's what I wanted to depict with Patrick, is that there wasn't he has this diagnosis, and that's it, clear cut, and each flashback represents a different aspect of it. And one of the things I did when I was writing and researching was I interviewed former students who I know had diagnoses, and just asked them. I even had them as sensitivity readers, and said, does this accurately depict something that you've experienced? And their feedback and response was very valuable to create this character.
Well, and I should also say, we're talking about these like very serious, heavy issues. It's a super fun book to read. It's just very enjoyable from start to finish, which sounds unlikely. But as I just liked, because sometimes I read issue books and I'm like, yeah, and I do not want to pick the book up again. This thing I buzzed through. I was just like, this thing is so readable, and it's so enjoyable to read, and it's dealing with these heavy issues, and it's being very serious, but it's also being super fun, which is a really hard balance to do.
I've seen. I try not to look at like the Goodreads, the little reviews. My wife won't let me, and that's something I've seen more than once. Is I love this book. It was so heartfelt. It was so funny. I don't know where to categorize it.
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of resonated with me. I'm not sure. I didn't think of it when I wrote it. Where would this go on the shelf? But it is hard to say. It is about the wake of a 13-year-old boy. But there's a lot of humor in it. It's funny. It's hard to express that.
I'm very pro funny book, so I'm like, this is a funny book, and I love a funny book, but it's also, and people always think like, well, if you're funny, you've got to be James Patterson, and you can't deal with like any issues at all, and if you do deal with an issue, it's like self-esteem, or bullies, and it's like, no, we can do lots more complex things, because you don't have one issue in this book. You've got a whole bunch of issues going on in this book, and that's what makes it so interesting to read. What are you working on next, can you say?
Yeah, I'm working on a couple of projects. I'm in the revision phase of, I'm going to hold the titles. Both middle grade. This one is speculative fiction.
Oh, good.
So I'm trying to branch out a little and do something else. And then the other one I'm working on is middle grade realistic, about a brother and sister who were adopted separately, and they have a hobby that I'm paralleling the world of sport fanatic kids with their. I'm going to hold off what their hobby is, but they have this whole subculture that has taken over their lives, and that's where they spend all their time. And
is it Minecraft? It's Minecraft.
It's not Minecraft.
Totally Minecraft.
No. And they have a personal coach, and this is where everything goes.
Wow.
And as they try to kind of explore their identity and where they fit in their.
So is it a sports book?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Oh, very interesting. Okay, I can't slot you into a neat little slot. That's very good, because I like it when I can't slot people in slots.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for A, writing this book, and B, coming and talking with us.
Thanks for inviting me. This
No
was great.
problem. This was
I
really
appreciate
fun.
it.
All right. Well, We are reaching about the time of the end of our broadcast. So we've been talking about Speechless. It is published by Candlewick Press. It is written by Adam Schmitt, and you can buy it for $16.99. And coming up soon on Author's Voice, here are our upcoming shows. On a House Divided with Aaron Sheehan Dean on December 21st at 3:30. Going to be talking about the calculus of violence, how Americans fought the Civil War. And if you have any questions or you would like to order a signed copy, you can do so at authorsvoice.net. If you are watching this on YouTube after the broadcast, you can actually still order the signed books. There's actually a link right under the title. Isn't that convenient? It's so super convenient. That's right. So thank you so much, Adam, for coming.
Thank you.
So much. And thank you guys at home for watching. Bye.
Bye.